Being that we are just one day removed from the very devastating injury that is keeping one of my favorite running backs for the 2021 NFL season off of draft boards now, he's no longer in the picture. This, of course, being Cam Akers for the Los Angeles Rams, who ruptured his Achilles on Tuesday morning, or at least news broke of it then. And we now know that he's no longer going to be on the table for us or in play this season. It's time to look at some other running back options and find some other players at the position that I think give us worthwhile upside. We'll be starting at the top of the board in today's video and working our way down, going over some names of players. I think that while there's not really anyone in here I think has quite the value or the upside as a late first round, early second round pick of a Cam Akers that gives us that number one overall running back potential and upside, these are a lot of names that I think can decently fulfill the value and piece together some of what might be left over in the aftermath of this injury. So without further ado, if you're new around here to the channel, make sure to head down and click that subscribe button. I post 6 fantasy videos a week, so there's a bunch of content for you to take advantage of each and every single week here on the channel. Let's head down, give this video a like before we get started. Let's hit that intro and get right into these league-winning running backs. As I touched on a little bit in the intro, these aren't necessarily all sleeper picks, and like I said, we are going to be starting at the top of the draft board here and moving down. So in general, these are just players that throughout the board have piqued my interest, and these are players that I think their upside and overall ceiling potential outweighs their draft position, so they could be a really great return on investment for us on draft day here. And again, this video is kind of inspired in the aftermath of that Cam Akers injury, because he is one of the players who I saw having the most upside this fantasy season and having the best opportunity to outperform that draft stock that he was requiring that we invest into him. So again, obviously with Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson is the next player in line. He will not be making an appearance in today's video because I want to take a full 48 hours or so to just kind of decompress and break down that fantasy situation and evaluating him as a talent and how I think he plays into this offense before I provide any too in-depth content on that Rams backfield moving forward. We've got some other names. Xavier Jones and Zach Funk, I believe, are the other two backs in there right now. Maybe they bring in a vet, maybe not. But the first player in today's video, of course, is Saquon Barkley. And we've actually got some more news regarding Saquon here over the last couple of days. That, of course, is that he actually came out and said, you know, his knee is recovering well. Things are progressing nicely, but he's not sure if he's going to be 100% ready to go for week 1. And this is a big deal here. Maybe he's just kind of tossing out some smoke and mirrors at this point in the offseason, but I don't know why a player would do that. So overall, I think we should feel fairly comfortable taking his word for that. And honestly, I think this kind of plays all to the better of fantasy owners here. And you might be thinking, well, if he's not ready to go for week 1, that's a big red flag. Like, what are you alluding to as what might be beneficial? Well, we don't want to see Saquon Barkley. We just saw a player have a significant injury. We don't want to see Saquon Barkley rush back and injure things by trying to recover too quickly from the process. Would you rather have Saquon Barkley producing at peak efficiency, peak form in week 3 or in week 16, week 17? I think I'd rather take him down the stretch of the fantasy playoffs. If I'm going to have to sacrifice knowing going into this fantasy season that I have to give up 1, 2, heck, who knows? If he really, truly isn't ready to go and we don't see him till maybe week 3, if I have to suffer and lose out on that production for a multitude of weeks at the beginning of the season, again, this is speculation here. He hasn't been ruled out of any contest, but it did. The words came out of his mouth in an interview that he doesn't know if he'll be prepared for the opening day of the NFL season. That's going to get factored into his draft cost. He's going to know more about the readiness of his knee, the progression of his recovery from that injury before he hits the field on opening day. And conversely, or hand in hand with that rather, he will know and probably have an update for us before the end of draft season. So if we know he's not going to be ready, his draft price is going to fall, and I'm going to get all the better value later on in my draft board. Maybe Barkley even falls back into Cam Akers' territory of the draft board in late August, if we all know as fantasy owners he's not playing week 1. So this is an opportunity here for incredible upside. I think Barkley has the potential to have more running back 1 finishes this season in any given week than any other player on the board. Akers is out of the picture now. That's a huge upside play that's no longer a force in lineups this season. And Barkley is in his own stratosphere when we talk about talent at the running back position. So he's got all the potential in the world. If he misses a couple of games, so be it. The upside is still going to be there. I'd rather see him 100% healthy and ready to go when he hits the field, because I think that upside when he is himself and ready to play is unmatched, and there's not really another player that can scratch the surfaces that he can get to with that upside that he has. So the next player up here is actually the player I think is most likely to fill the shoes of Cam Akers on draft boards, and that's Antonio Gibson. I think that when we talk about running backs who have the ceiling, the potential to be drafted in the late first round, high second round, which is right where Cam Akers was going, excuse me, in those 12-team leagues, Akers was going anywhere between that 12th and 14th overall draft pick. I think Antonio Gibson is kind of the next man up here. He finished as the RB13 in 2020 fantasy football despite only playing 14 games. And right now he's being drafted as the RB13 off the board. But removing Cam Akers from the situation, simple math here, remove him out of there, that bumps Antonio Gibson up to the RB12 spot and an RB1 at that. So I think we could see Gibson creep up on draft boards, and he was one of my favorite value picks in the late second, early third round. Sometimes you could even get a hold of him depending on who you're drafting with. That's probably not the case anymore. I think Antonio Gibson's going to see a little bit more hype. There's been discussion between, obviously, himself and his coach about having an increased utilization in the receiving game, which, if you haven't watched Antonio Gibson much in his rookie season, he's incredibly dynamic. He played wide receiver in college, so he has very polished skills in that area of the game. So if Gibson produces again as a rusher this season, he was very good in the touchdown department. If he can keep that going, this Washington football offense got better from last season, but they still don't have any hogs in this offense that are going to just rack up a ridiculous touchdown count. I'd say the sky's the limit for Gibson. And if I had to pick one player who I think has the next best upside here, it would be Gibby. I think that there's a lot of room for growth, improvement on what was already a strong rookie season. And again, if he rises up those draft boards, maybe I don't favor him so highly and draft him as often as a Cam Akers, because I don't think he can be quite as good as what Cam would have been, but we still like this draft pick a lot here approaching draft season. J.K. Dobbins is my next player up here. We're kind of creeping into third round territory now. J.K. is going with a 28th overall pick, so right in that top 4 or 5 draft picks of the third round. This is another one where J.K. isn't going to be used as a workhorse back per se, because the Ravens do have somewhat of a committee system rolling there in Baltimore, but he is the lead back in that committee. And for a player who has the ability in the open field to be as explosive as J.K. Dobbins can be, the goal line upside, Gus Edwards will snatch some of that opportunity and volume away from him. But J.K. is still going to get his numbers. We don't love J.K. Dobbins because we think he's going to get 25 touches per game this season. If he can get us 16 to 18 and on a great week, 20 touches, you're looking at a guy who could go for 120, 140 yards with that type of workload because of how good he is as a talent and as a skilled player. So you've got so much attention drawn into Lamar Jackson as a rushing threat in this offense that he's kind of the second thought no matter what, just right off the bat because of number 8's presence on the field. So there's a lot of room for explosive caliber plays. J.K. Dobbins I have listed and ranked as a running back 1 for the 2021 season. So again, this is a player that's probably seeing an increase in his draft price due to the fact that Akers is no longer present. It looks like Dobbins might be one of the better second-year backs in fantasy this season, again, with Akers removed from the situation. I would argue he's already a better pick than a DeAndre Swift and a Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but ADP and draft prices sometimes reflect other results. But JK is certainly up there for me this season. Now we're going to move a significant amount of draft picks down the board here and actually head into the 6th round. I'm not too big of a fan of running backs in the 4th and 5th rounds. I think that Sometimes you can snatch up a David Montgomery, a Chris Carson in the early 4th, but that's lucky, and that's kind of a steal in its own right as players who should be going in the late 3rd at minimum. So the other names I wasn't too big of a fan of here, but what I really do like, and a theme you're going to see for the rest of today's video, is that these rookie running backs are picks you absolutely want to be investing in here. And the main thing I want to preach with these guys is patience. Patience, patience, patience is how you're going to reap the rewards of these rookie players this fantasy season. Jevonte Williams is not going to come out week 1 and put up RB1 numbers. He's not going to come out week 4 probably and put up RB1 numbers. Melvin Gordon is a very prominent force in this offense. He's the lead back. He's a proven vet. He's going to get his work and his numbers. But inevitably, at the end of the day, Jevonte Williams is the future of this team. This is the player they want to use. They traded up for him in the 2nd round of the draft this season, so he has the requisite draft capital to show us that there is value to him on this roster and that they do see a significant role for him on this team, and he's going to be used some point or another this year. So whether that's week 8, week 10, maybe he doesn't really get in there as the 3-down back until week 12. But I'm here to tell you he has that work set and that skill set rather of a 3-down workhorse running back. At North Carolina, he showed us he can catch the ball out of the backfield actually very smoothly and very clean. He doesn't really lose a step in the receiving game when catching passes. He can put his shoulder down. He's shifty in the open field for a player of his size. And he's a thicker body, so he's not going to go down often on first contact. He's probably not the most dominant player when putting his shoulder down, but it's certainly not a weakness in his game. So a very complete player. He's not necessarily like your elite back at any certain skill set, but I would almost contribute or attribute him rather to a Mike Davis, where Mike isn't elite at any traits, and I would say that Jevonte Williams is still a better athletic prospect and still does these talents better than Mike Davis, and the fact that he's got a higher ceiling as well. But Mike Davis does nothing flashy, but he's a player who doesn't have a significant hole in his game, so he's able to stay on the field for all 3 downs and put up some pretty solid fantasy numbers. So Jevonte's a player you want to keep your eye out for here. In the 6th round, I would argue he's probably got the best upside of mostly any of the backs on the table at this point. So Jevonte Williams, the theme with these rookie running backs is be patient. They're going to pop, they're going to break out, but in the later stages of the season. So don't panic, don't trade them, don't drop them when they don't do anything for the first quarter of the year, because he's going to be used in phases. But even if he has a game where he stumbles into the end zone twice and only has 8 touches in the whole game, don't come out and start him the next week, because he's going to put up a dud. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to want to move on from him. That's not how we need to look at these running backs. I've talked about this multiple times in videos here. Look back the past couple of years. It takes these rookie running backs until the back half of the season usually to break out. Even Jonathan Taylor's, like last season, he was struggling. Even though he was the team starter for most of the year, he didn't really figure out this offense and get rolling until the last 5, 6, 7 games of the season. So it takes more time than you'd expect. Even though the workload might be there right off the bat for some of these players, it still is an adjustment and still is something they need to get used to. So don't panic is my main message of the day today for Jevonte Williams. Rojo here is my next player moving into the early 7th round. This one is kind of something I've went back and forth with this offseason. It's something that I've assessed differently throughout the offseason, in particular this Bucs offense as a whole. But I just filled out Ronald Jones's draft profile on sizzlefantasy.com for the ReDraft draft collection this season. And the more I've been talking about the Buccaneers pass catchers the past couple of weeks has made me reevaluate how I consider their run game. And Ronald Jones technically is not the starter for this team's backfield. That's Leonard Fournette. But it's very, very close to a 50-50 split. And I actually think that Ronald Jones is, in my opinion, the better back in that backfield. And I would just love, and I would die to see him be used as a workhorse running back, because I think he's got the energy, the high physicality play style. He's not the best receiving back in the world, but he doesn't really have stone hands per se. Like, he definitely, it's not a strength of his to catch the football out of the backfield, but it's not something that's going to hinder his production so massively that I'm not interested in drafting him here. He's got explosive ability. He had a 98-yard rushing touchdown last season, but it's his stature and his ability to use his physical traits to his advantage that really help him excel as a running back. But what I would love to see is 20-plus touches on a per-game basis for Ronald Jones. And that's just not going to happen as long as Leonard Fournette is there. He gets that usage when Fournette's injured and off the field, and that actually happens more often than not and more than people realize. So there's going to be games and opportunities where Ronald's going to come into the week being used as the RB1 force in that backfield. But actually what makes me like him more so than that, because I don't like to bet on players getting injured unless it's a significant part of their fantasy equation. The thing that makes me feel the best about the Bucs offense this season is that they're returning all 22 starters this year. It's going to be a very, very good football team. And I've talked about how I'm a bit worried for their receivers' upsides because they're not going to be passing in the fourth quarter if they're front running and just trying to run the game out. They're going to be handing the ball off to these running backs. And these guys are going to be powering through defenses, closing games out. And that's just going to increase the touch count and the workload that each of them sees. So I like Ronald Jones' upside more to begin with because I think he's the better player. You get him in the open field, and he's just a better running back in my opinion. Playoff Lenny is a different story. And when I did his draft guide profile, if you stack up his regular season numbers to his postseason numbers, it's night and day and absolutely ridiculous. But nonetheless, Ronald Jones here is my favorite running back in this Tampa Bay backfield. I think that he's got a whole lot of upside here. And if you're drafting him as your running back 3 off the board in the early 7th round, it's a pick you can't really go wrong with, and he will give you some RB1 finishes this season. So I like that investment a lot. Trey Sermon here moving into the middle of the 8th round. This one's pretty simple for me. Jeff Wilson Jr. tore his meniscus. What does that do? Trey Sermon moves up into the RB2 spot in this 49ers roster. Raheem Mostert has a role carved out for himself. That is not changing. He's still a player that is going to have utilization in this offense as the explosive player, and he's almost a change of pace back in his own right, even though he's kind of their leadoff back here. But he does often get injured as well. He is sometimes a player who struggles with availability issues and just injuries to all parts of his body. I mean, I don't think that people realize that Raheem Mostert is already creeping towards his age 30 season, so not as young and youthful as people would expect because we haven't heard about him for the majority of his career because he's been bouncing around teams and struggling to hold down a roster spot. But Trey Sermon here, a 3rd-round pick for the 49ers in the 2021 draft, he does just about everything well. And something that has been surprisingly good to hear as a fantasy owner is that he has been an excelling receiving target out of the backfield in training camp, which is something that I didn't really factor into his fantasy equation when assessing his rookie draft guide profile, which, again, that's just all more fuel to the fire of why I want to pick him here because the upside is so high. Kyle Shanahan will move around the backs that he deploys out there on a week-to-week basis, and if Trey Sermon catches a hot hand on one week, if he gets the opportunity to start in the absence of a Mostert, again, his path to touches is a bit easier without Jeff Wilson on the field. He's got a really complete tool set. He can use physicality. He's literally hurdled players in the college football playoff in the middle of the open field, and he's a bruiser. So he's going to have the chance to have the goal line touches with Jeff Wilson off the field, a bigger body. He should have a chance to be utilized in just about every way we want to see for fantasy running backs here. So behind my Najee Harris and my Jevonte Williams for this season, there's a chance Trey Sermon might be better than Travis Etienne this season. You know, if Travis Etienne gets used as a wonky offensive weapon, pass-catching Percy Harvin role for the Jaguars, I don't see any reason why Trey Sermon, who's being used as a legit running back and has chances to start games here, doesn't have upside that goes toe-for-toe with him. So please draft Trey Sermon. He's probably my most drafted player at this point in the fantasy offseason. If you go watch my mock drafts, just about every single time when he's on the board in the 8th or 9th round, sometimes even the 7th, I'm pulling the trigger and getting his services on my team. Zack Moss is a new player that I haven't really talked about here on the channel, but I think has some upside in his own right. I would say the floor is very, very shaky here for Moss, but we're taking him in the late 8th round. There's not too much risk involved here, and these aren't players. I would say that besides J.K. Dobbins and Antonio Gibson at the top of the board, and obviously Saquon Barkley, as the first name in today's video, you're not taking any of these players higher than an RB3 on your roster. Obviously, your Dobbins, your Gibson, your Barkley are your RB1s and your RB2s. Obviously respectively different to where you're drafting each of those players at. But the rest of these guys are high upside flyer picks as RB3s and RB4s that we're just picking solely for ceiling potential here. So Zack Moss in his rookie season, I think a lot of people were overhyping both him and Devin Singletary. There was two legitimate camps last season. You were either Team Moss or Team Singletary, and both stunk up the show, and both were very, very disappointing picks because I think that, we saw Devin Singletary going in the 4th round. He didn't live up to that whatsoever. And then Zack Moss really wasn't all that much better. So the thing that I really like about Moss here this season, though, is that Josh Allen had 8 rushing touchdowns last season. And I think that the Bills are going to come to the realization some point or another that although Josh Allen has this big body that he can just run players over with and be a dominant force on the goal line, your franchise quarterback is a lot more important and a lot more urgent to keep care of and not throw in harm's way, as opposed to Zack Moss, who is basically just a disposable weapon for this team. You can go out and draft a running back with Zack Moss's skill set every other year in the 4th round of a draft. Toss him out there. Make him suck up that abuse. I mean, Josh Allen is the most valuable player the Bills franchise has had in years now. And like I said, maybe it isn't the season. Maybe Zack Moss turns into a bust here. I think his fantasy floor is pretty dang low. But the upside, I think, is fairly high, because when you talk about a team that's using their quarterback as a battering ram, and we saw this with Cam Newton, they get injured, banged up, and beaten down fairly quickly. So Zack Moss is the biggest running back in this Bills backfield. They brought in Matt Breida this season, but he's a change of pace player. He's basically always injured too. Devin Singletary's 5'7". He's basically a poor man's Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which is not something you want to be compared to in fantasy football. So Moss is the clear-cut number 1 option to be used as a goal line back in this offense. Maybe he doesn't get that elite upside and volume this season, but he is the best candidate in this offense to do so. And again, Moss is a player that people don't realize is a very, very underrated receiving threat and can catch passes out of this backfield. So maybe Moss isn't coming out here having 1,000 scrimmage yards, because the Bills are a pass-first team. They're going to be throwing all over the lot. Downfield, that is, rather, as opposed to always checking down out of the backfield. But there's still going to be volume and opportunities to be had here. I think he's got the best and most complete skill set and body of a back on this team. So there's room for some upside here. And if we're looking for a pick, again, nearly a 9th-round player, I don't see why not take a chance on Zack Moss here. Michael Carter is the last player in today's video. He's currently going as an early 9th-round pick. If you've been watching my mock drafts here on the channel, he's usually going in the 8th round, sometimes sooner, especially when we do that with subscribers, because they know I'm out to get Michael Carter too. So they're trying to snatch him up before he gets to me on the draft board. But this is a situation where Michael Carter is right now penciled in as the 3rd-string running back for the New York Jets offense. But that, I don't think I'm alone by saying that is not something I expect to hold true for very long whatsoever. LaMichael Pirine is the 2nd back in this offense right now, led off by Tevin Coleman. So both highly replaceable players. Michael Carter was a 3rd-round draft pick, an early one at that for the Jets this season. They want to make this offense better, get more dynamic, more explosive. That's what Carter is. Extremely shifty and utilized as both a runner and receiver at North Carolina. Actually teammates with Jevonte Williams, who was featured earlier on in this video from the Denver Broncos. But again, LaMichael Pirine and Tevin Coleman are decent, but they're not going to stop a player who has such a dynamic usage and skill set from getting involved in this offense. So for the Jets, they really need a strong rushing threat. I think Michael Carter can do that. And then I also think that if he takes over the RB1 workload in this offense, his receiving volume and the ability for him to be a safety blanket for a rookie quarterback in Zach Wilson is going to give him a really nice fantasy floor. So the theme with these running backs, if you can be patient, they will hit for you late down the stretch this year. Michael Carter, he's not a starter right now, but he could be a high upside RB2 week in and week out scorer weeks 10 through 17 next year. So if you can just bear the short end of the stick for half the season, find a way to make it work. I always kind of strategize and put my teams together. I'm just trying to go 500 and stay in the mix for the first half of the year. I don't need to be the number 1 seed the whole season. What I want to have is the best upside and the best team constructed weeks 12 through 17, 14 through 16. Whenever your playoff is, I want to have the best roster at that time in the season. That's when I want to get hot. It's fine with me if my teams don't do amazing in the first half of the season, because at the end of the day, that's not what matters. You want to peak at the right time, and you don't want to have people who are laying eggs for you at the end of the year. Think back to last season. Todd Gurley probably seemed like he was a freaking fantastic player for the first 2/3 of the year. He's scoring all these touchdowns, but when you dove deeper into the numbers, he literally only had like 1 or 2 100-yard games, and the rest of his production was coming straight off that goal line. What did I do? Get him out of town, trade him, find me someone else that can produce better numbers. And then the team that got stuck with Todd Gurley down the stretch, their team, their ceiling and their floor tanked because he was underproducing so badly. And same thing with the Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He was struggling down the stretch too last season. Josh Jacobs even at times wasn't playing so hot. So there's just a lot of things we got to look at here. These players, I think, give us a great chance to do that, and that's to peak at the end of the season and give us those elite numbers we want when it counts the most. So what do we have? About 7-8 names on today's list. Make sure you go out and target these guys in your fantasy leagues. Again, Cam Akers no longer on the table for us, unfortunately. He ruptured his Achilles, so we got to explore some other options for that elite running back upside. All right, there we go. So those are some running backs I think have some pretty solid chances to be league winners this fantasy season. Maybe they don't all have the nicest floors. Maybe they don't all hit. And it's more likely than not that some of these players, I think that a Zack Moss might be on the lower end as a guy having a pretty shaky floor for me this season. But again, the upside is there, and that's what we're looking for in today's video, because these are guys that if you just take a chance on them, maybe you've got 4 or 5 leagues you're playing in this year. If you invest into maybe each one of these players once or twice here and there, you can hit some pretty hard upside and get yourself put in a really great situation to succeed down the stretch. So thank you all so much for tuning into today's video. We've got a lot of exciting stuff coming the rest of the week here. If you want to be more involved with the SFS community and the channel, the stuff that we've got going on around here, head down into the description of this video and join that free community Discord invite where we're talking fantasy news and all that good stuff in there, and you'll have the chance to join my subscriber mock drafts. So one more time, thank you guys so much for stopping by today. I'll see you next time. Peace out.